We have an amazing panel for you guys tonight. We actually have two panels. The first panel is students, schools designed with us in mind, K through 12. And I'm going to let Brennan introduce those panelists. And then our second panel right after this one is a high school student panel where we're actually going to ask the students the same questions that we're asking the experts, right? Because that's what we're talking about. So we want to get feedback from the students. Our moderator for the Schools Designed with Us in Mind panel is Brennan DuBose, who is a PhD student in English education here at TC. And our moderator for the high school students panel is Christina Chase, who is a master's student in sociology and education. She's over there. So we're going to get started today. I'll hand it over to Brennan. Thanks.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So let me just first introduce this extraordinary panel we have tonight. We have tonight Mr. David C. Banks. Mr. Banks is the president and CEO of the Eagle Academy Foundation. He was the founding principal of the Eagle Academy for Young Men First School in a network of innovative all-boys public school in New York City. As president, he is responsible for the successful leadership and management of the organization, which is charged with the replication of the successful Eagle model. Since opening in 2004, the Eagle Academy family has grown to encompass a total of 6 schools in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Newark, Harlem, and Staten Island areas, and is expanding its vision nationally. We have today Dr. Amy Stuart Wells. Dr. Wells is a professor of sociology and education and the director of the Center for the Understanding of Race in Education at Teachers College, Columbia University. Her research and writing has focused broadly on issues of race in education, and more specifically on the educational policies such as school desegregation, school choice, charter schools, tracking and how they shape and constrain opportunities for students of color. Dr. Wells has an ongoing research project entitled Metro Migrations, Racial Segregation, and School Boundaries. She examines urban and suburban demographic change and the role that public schools and their boundaries play in who moves where. Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz. She is an associate professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, and is a former research associate with the NYU Metropolitan Center for Urban Education. Her research interests include racial literacy development in urban teacher education, Black female college reentry students, the educational experiences of Black and Latino overage and undercredited male high school students, and crossover youth in juvenile justice and foster care systems. Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz is the secretary for the Teaching and Teacher Education Division of the American Educational Research Association, and as a member of the nominating committee for the National Council for Teachers of English, and the 2012 through 2013 Ford Postdoctoral Fellow. Dr. Terri Watson is an assistant professor in the Department of Leadership in Special Education at the City College of New York. Her dissertation, Florida's Definition of Subsequent Calculations of Public High School and Graduates, a Critical Race Theory Analysis, was awarded the 2010 Outstanding Dissertation of the Year by the College of Education at Florida Atlantic University. Her research interests include the application of critical race theory to educational policies and successful principles of urban schools. Could you please give this amazing panelist a round of applause? So we're going to dive right in, and my first question will be directed to Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz. Recent data from the U.S. Department of Education shows that Black and brown students are suspended and expelled at a higher rate than their white counterparts. Why do you think this occurs, and what can be done to eliminate this disparity?
Thank you, Brennan. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Wonderful to see you. This is something that a question that we've been trying to figure out, right, for a couple of decades now, I would say probably since integration, with Black students being integrated with white students and getting different treatment. And then somehow it has continued, even when there are no, let's say, white students present within schools. It's also part of the work that for about 3 years I was doing with the Metropolitan Center, trying to find out why so many Black and Latino boys in particular were being disproportionately placed in special ed. And so the answer that I offer comes from my work of both reading in that field, but also working with these school districts. And not in a very simplified way, I don't mean to simplify it at all, but there is a difference in cultural understandings, I believe. And oftentimes the behavior of Black and Latino students are often misread in a way that is anti to what the schools accept as proper behavior. And as a result, students often end up in special education or end up in the timeout room and end up being taken out of classes and spoken to or taken out of school altogether and suspended. And so the problem is complex. I think from what I understood in working with these schools is the cultural mismatch and understanding of how Black bodies and brown bodies are read, and also the ethos of the particular schools. If it's a zero tolerance policy school, which most of these schools were, there are certain behaviors that are just not accepted at all. And it tended to be, even in schools that were all Black and all brown, this standard of behavior that is often looked at as how white students perform, even when there are no white students present, and that if students aren't measuring up in that way, then it's behavior that's not accepted. So just to try to summarize, I would say there's a cultural mismatch. It's also the policies of the school that are oftentimes at odds with the students themselves.
Thank you. Dr. Stuart Wells, in what ways do statistics sway the public to believe that African American and Latino students are inevitably failures? How can educators in the community fight against this statement?
First of all, I just want to say hi and thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. I read that question and I was thinking about a lot of the research on, well, lies, damn lies, and statistics, but also how we construct statistics. And then the word sway, the relationship between the statistics and the public opinion struck me because I guess I've been thinking a lot about how statistics are used to legitimize public opinion. And so I think the question is whether we have these sets of assumptions and beliefs, and then we find data and to use as ammunition to legitimize the decisions that we've made, including public policies and education around how we assess and measure achievement ability that relates to a lot of very important sociocultural issues. And I'm really interested in how this whole accountability system and the rise of the whole accountability system is so deeply entrenched in these cultural norms that Yolanda was talking about, and how that then is served to legitimize these definitions of good schools, good students, good behavior, bad behavior, and how that gets perpetuated and feeds into our understanding of students of color and the way in which we value them in the society, and then reinforces a lot of norms, beliefs, assumptions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Banks, what types of institutions potentially lift up African American and Latino students for success in education?
Well, so first of all, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I hope you don't mind my having my Mets hat up here in the front. You're winning 5-1 right now. Yes. I'm excited about that. I always found it was easy to be a Yankees fan. They're always winning, right? But to be a Mets fan, you gotta be strong, you gotta be resilient, you gotta be faithful, because we suffer through. And in so many ways, it's a perfect analogy to what our young men face, and making the connection and the ability to dig deep within themselves, to be able to deal with kind of the assault that they face on a daily basis, whether it's through the media, whether it's through policies, whether it's through teachers and family and community. They're under constant assault. And so it really behooves us as a nation to begin to really focus on creating institutions that will support and develop our young men not because it's just the right thing to do, but because this nation, I firmly believe, cannot really be all that it is supposed to be. Economically, will not be able to continue to compete on the world stage when you have such a significant level of this population completely marginalized. It's not good economics. And I think that's a message that we have to begin to send as well. Because when we talk about it more from the moral standpoint, there are a lot of people who completely tuned out. But when you talk about it from a dollars and cents and recognize that this is an issue of real national security, this is not just some small group. In an increasingly diverse nation, right? This is not our grandfather's America. Mitt Romney found that out, right? When he ran. This is an increasingly diverse nation, and yet we got policies, we have practices in place that are completely marginalizing a part of our population that it just doesn't make economic sense. And I think that's important for us to begin to stress that. So as we begin to build institutions, one of the things that we were engaged in is the creation of the Eagle Academy as the first all-boys public school in New York City in more than 30 years. So for those of you who don't know, more than a decade ago, my organization, 100 Black Men here in New York City, decided that we were looking at all these statistics. We had always attended conferences and workshops just like this, and panel discussions. And it seemed like at the end of the day, people were writing books. We brought panel discussions and conferences to an art form. We know how to do those really, really well. But it seemed like the most you could really hope for was a good after-school program for a dozen kids. And we decided we would try to do more than that. And so what we did was we created the Eagle Academy. The Eagle Academy, it's important to know, is a network of traditional public schools. They're not charter schools. And by design, because many people ask us to open them as charter schools, but we recognize that while there's some really great charter schools out there, we need them to kind of be part of this educational landscape. If we're really going to do, really move the needle in a significant way, you can't charter your way out of this educational morass. And so that's not meant to take any shots at charters. It's simply meant to say that if you recognize the numbers, today as we sit here, over 90% of our children still go to traditional public schools. At the high school level, it's over 98%. You wouldn't know that if you listen to this narrative on a daily basis. You would think that, that the charter schools basically rival public schools in terms of numbers. They do not. And if we're not lifting up educational models in the traditional public school sector, we're just going to simply play around on the margin with this thing. I'm a product of the public school system, K-12. I was a teacher for 6 years in Brooklyn, an assistant principal for 2 years, a principal for 11 years, founding principal of 2 different schools. I've been in the system, I know what it is. I'm not just some outside guy who came in and decided how I wanted to impact public schools. I've spent my career here, and now for almost the last 8 years, heading the Eagle Academy Foundation, which really oversees all of the schools that we have created. So this notion of creating the Eagle as an institution is simply an example of the kinds of efforts I think that need to be made to really begin to transform the system. We have a whole host of strategies and a framework of how we engage our young men that has helped them to buy into their own success and to hold themselves accountable as well. The Eagle Academy, now we went from having 100 boys in the 9th grade when I was the principal of the school to now having a school in every borough in the city, as well as in Newark, New Jersey, with over 2,000 young men in our network, in a frame that, and when each one of our schools grows to full capacity, we'll have over 4,000 young men that we're working with year in and year out. And I'll tell you this as I wrap up, is this. Part of the reason why Eagle was created was because of a report that was issued by Columbia University maybe about 15 years ago. We said that 75% of the inmates for the entire New York State prison population come from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. Jesus. And you just think about that for a minute. The entire state's prison population, you're talking about Rochester, Albany, Buffalo, Syracuse, the whole state of New York. 75% of the state's prison population not only is it a big enough deal that they come from New York City, but they're not coming from Bayside, Queens. They're very specific zip codes that fuel, it's what we refer to as the prison pipeline. Right? But you gotta wrap your mind around it to understand how real that is. And very specific communities. And those are some of the communities that we have tried to replicate our work and going into those places to say it doesn't have to be that way. When we opened, there were no other all-boys public high schools in New York City. There were none in the country. Now, over 50 have opened around the country since we opened our doors 11 years ago. And so we're continuing to try to figure ways in which we scale this work.
Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Watson. At any educational level, but specifically at the grade school level, where children begin to form their identities, what impact, if any, may academic success have on African American and Latino students' views and/or expressions of self?
First off, thanks for having me. In response to the question, I think that grades at any level is important for identity, but particularly at the grade school level, because you're just figuring out who you are. And it's almost like a trajectory, if you will. If you start off on a strong foot, and more than likely, your chances for post-secondary education increases. Moreover, because oftentimes, and I know going into my daughter's school, you see the honor roll posted, and kids who are rewarded for good grades, they get recognized. And not just students, but everyone needs that kind of external validation. And oftentimes when students are not rewarded, not only for their grades, but just for their efforts, because we all have different abilities, but when they aren't rewarded, they'll find other ways to validate themselves. And that's where we have the negative consequences and timeouts, and we're called high flyers sometimes, like who's gonna act out for the attention. So in response to the question, grades are unfortunately very important. The downside to that is they're simply external validations, and as you know, the report came out recently that said how teachers recommend so few children of color for gifted and talented programs, and the sad part was that it's teachers of color. So oftentimes we don't see the greatness in ourselves or find different ways to tap into our diverse and broad array of talents. So I think the challenge is to find ways to validate students besides academic efforts. I mean, I think effort does count, and grades do matter, but what about just being good citizens, about following the rules and playing fair and working real hard? There has to be some way to quantify that so that students are recognized for just doing the work. And sometimes just getting the schools doing the work, and that does count, particularly if you want to keep it up in struggling schools and communities, because it does matter in terms of outcomes, lifetime outcomes and earnings. So if we have a strong foundation, your likelihood for continued improvement and chances just increases.
Thank you. Dr. Stuart Wells, what advice would you give to teachers on the college level who might be teaching students linguistically, culturally, and/or socially different from them?
This is a great question. It's going to take me like 20 years to figure out, but it's a very important question right now, given the demographic changes in this country and the fact that the professorate is still predominantly white, and I'd say people from more privileged backgrounds on average. So it's a huge issue, and then on top of that, I think just the nature of higher ed is changing with technology and how we think about knowledge, and this whole kind of paradigm of delivering content to students is changing in ways that we're not really grappling with in higher ed, or I would say in some places more than others. And then on top of that, just with the recent legal cases around affirmative action and this argument that that there's an educational benefit to having diverse student bodies and diverse dialogue and intercultural discussions and dialogue and understanding within a classroom, that we have yet to really prove how you do that, right? Or that we are doing that. And some of the more conservative federal judges are asking whether we do really do that. And it's actually a really good question. So I think when you bring all of those things together, we're at a really critical moment in higher education. And for those of you who are going on to receive doctorate degrees and engage in a career in higher ed teaching, I hope you'll be part of that solution. I think right now we need to just focus on pedagogy and curriculum in higher ed, particularly in these Research One universities like Columbia, in a way that we never have before. Think about Anna Newman's important work that shows the critical link between research and teaching. If we were to not separate them or think of them as two different things, but how they actually reinforce and support each other and help us do better research and teaching. And then as we think about diverse classrooms, just how do we create some intercultural understanding among students and between faculty and students in a way that allows a lot of different voices and perspectives to be heard, which is what we've been arguing in the courts, is the value of diversity in higher education. And what does that mean for a professor who thinks the professor is the expert there to deliver content and knowledge to students, right? Instead, how is the professor, how's the faculty member also learning as part of that process and changing his or her pedagogy to think through and understanding different students' perspectives in a way that respects where students are coming from. Also, I've just been thinking a lot about this. We talk a lot about pedagogy of the oppressed, and that's very important. But are we thinking carefully about pedagogy of the privileged, right? And now that we have, I think, a society that's more divided in terms of income, it's continually divided in terms of race. The demographics of college students and graduate students is changing. We have more international students. How do we bring all that together in a classroom in a way that actually all students can kind of learn from these different experiences, perspectives, and to value that knowledge that's co-constructed? So I don't really have the answer to the question, but I think that the question actually helped me kind of lay out the problem. And I think the main answer is that we need to be, instead of spending all our time in faculty meetings talking about administrative issues and budgets, which are important, but that we could actually be talking about teaching and learning and in higher ed. And there have been a few moments in the last couple of years at TC where we've been doing that, and I think the faculty have been really open and receptive to it. And I think there's a lot of vulnerability among particularly older white faculty. And we need to create safe spaces for them to talk about the struggles that they're having and to be supportive of their interest in thinking this through and hearing from younger faculty who've been working on this. So I know I'm kind of raising more questions than I'm giving you an answer, but I think that's a really important issue, and we're at a critical moment in the history of higher ed. So, and I think more student input would be awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Stuart Wells. Dr. Sealey-Ruiz, how may incorporating culture-appropriate arts into school curriculum strengthen the state of African American and Latino students in education?
Well, incorporating cultural arts would be just one piece of the many things that we need to do, right? But if we're going to talk about that, I mean, my first reaction is, how could it not? Because I think about the power of the arts, I think about the power of dance, of music, of drawing, and I think about my own child and the creativity that it opens up for her, right? What I appreciate and what I see when she goes to Harlem School of the Arts, right, which is not just dancing, but it is traditional dancing, but it's also dancing in cultural form. It opens her up in a way that is hard for me to describe, right? And so my belief is, if you can have cultural appropriate arts or culturally matched arts to those young people, they're also learning about themselves. They are exercising creativity, and it's connecting them to the art form in a very powerful way. And my belief is, if you can connect first and foremost to art forms that come from your traditions, it allows you, I think, to be a bit more open to other cultural art forms. And the reality is that in schools, unless it's a specific school, perhaps like Eagle Academy, or I think about the schools that Carol Lee and Hakeem Manabuti have ran for the past 30 years, where it is culturally centered. Unless it's a specific school like that, most kids are not getting culturally focused, culturally appropriate arts. And so we know that there's power to it, so let's just do it. Right? Let's just do it and allow them to soar and to fly and to connect, and then be open to other types of forms as well. But the total absence of it is what needs to be I think, paid attention to. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, y'all? Right.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Mr. Banks, how do you implement social justice pedagogy in the classroom?
Well, I think first of all, in order to implement social justice pedagogy, you have to, in fact, be engaged in some steps before then that help lift the consciousness of young people, first and foremost. Before you can do that, it goes back to the earlier question, which was really raised, which is about how do you make sure that you have your teaching staff is conscious and aware. So these things don't happen by magic. There are steps that have to be ordered. Very often we talk about what is happening or not happening with our young people in the classrooms, but for me, so often it's really about what's happening with the adults in the building, and the adults in their lives. And so when we talk about helping young people to understand the history, right? Being able to understand that there were people who fought, bled, died, sacrificed, people whose shoulders they stand on. That's really important. If you're going to be engaged in any kind of social activism, you have to understand the struggles that came before you. How many of you saw the film Selma? How many of you took a young person to see it as well? Right. So it's kudos.
That's in my sister cuts.
Right? Yeah. No, and that's right. And you got to start with those who are closest to you, right? Your own children, first of all, for those who have, and then if you got a nephew, a niece, somebody, you want to help to lift and encourage so that our young people understand who they are. I recently wrote my book, it's called SOAR, How Boys Learn, Succeed, and Develop Character. And in writing this book, one of the things that I talk about is a particular scene where some of the young men were really acting up horribly. This is during our first year. I had to bring these guys into my office and really kind of get on their case about what is expected of them. And I made a reference to roots, Kunta Kinte. And now there's a reaction from you. But the reaction that I got from them were blank faces. They didn't even know what I was talking about. Are you talking about feeling old in a moment? I said, wait a minute, Roots. Remember, the TV show that came on, Roots. And you start realizing how many of them had never seen it. And so I use that as a moment to show them a particular scene in the film. But it really went to this, and as they watched it, it was complete silence in the room. They were riveted. But what it said to me was, we can't do enough of this to make sure that we are demonstrating and helping them to understand the history. When these young people walk around here and their pants are hanging off their behinds, they're not being social activists. But the fault is not theirs. The fault is ours as adults. They've not been exposed, right? And so it really, in so many ways, starts with that. That's why we took over 1,000 of our young men to see Selma. Because not only did it help them to understand what the civil rights movement was about, but also to help to reinforce this notion that they were young people who put their lives right on the front lines, and why that is so important to help young people to understand that and to get it. It's not about a bunch of old people, young people, but young people who were smart, who were strategic, who were focused, and who were on fire because they knew who they were. And so as adults, we have to make sure that we're engaging in that process. I often will say to a group of adults just like this, we talk about young people and understanding the cultural history, but the question is, how many of us in this room right now, if we gave out a test and said you can't leave until you pass this test about Black history, how many of you would be able to walk out of the room? So many of us know about Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, and even there, many of us know a minimal amount. We know about I Have a Dream and that kind of thing, but if you push and go much further than that, there are a whole lot of us who don't live up to the standard. And so these schools of education are producing the adults who are charged with educating our children very much are focused, and it should be, on basic pedagogy of, the content areas that you have to teach. But where we could do so much better all across the country is in really making sure that we all have a much deeper understanding ourselves about the very young people that we are supposed to be teaching. Some of it is not, the resistance from some people is not racial. It's not that they're even racist. It's a level of uncomfortability and unfamiliarity that people have. And so unless we're doing a much better job about presenting the proper context for people to be engaged in the right kinds of conversations, uncomfortable or not, and being made aware. At the Eagle Academy, from the very first day that our young men show up, they are all assigned to a house. And the houses are named after iconic male figures. So you're either part of the Che Guevara house, or the Roberto Clemente house, or the Nelson Mandela house, or the Barack Obama house. I mean, there are a whole series of houses, and within those houses, they develop an identity within those houses. But it helps to raise their consciousness, which is so important, and that's the foundation by which you help to build socially active young people.
Can I ask a counter question? Is that okay? Because I was listening to you, Mr. Banks, and when you talked about specifically the pants sagging, it made me think about my student Curtis, who said, we were talking about the difference between seeing and noticing. And he said, I know when people see me and they don't know me from a hole in the wall, they're going to think I'm not doing anything with my life. But those who really know me and notice me, they know that I'm about something. And he said, I choose to sag my pants. That's just the way that I choose to move. That doesn't mean that I'm not about anything.
Sure.
So how do we, for those people who want to take kind of the surface, they're sagging their pants, they're doing this, and to say something negative about young brothers, how do we speak that back to that? Because the way that I think that their attire is, and I'm old school. Okay, get a belt, whatever.
Right.
Because you sag your pants doesn't mean that I don't, because I know brilliant brothers who do that.
So what I would say, a couple of things. One, first of all, I'm old school as well. And I know that every generation has its style. I get that. For the life of me, I don't get this one. And sagging is one thing, and completely showing people up and down the street you're complete behind, that is something for me that I do have an issue with that. Call it old school, but it is what it is. But again, doesn't matter. How you dress does not define who you are. I get that. But I also am very clear, because I'm not doing this from a theoretical standpoint. I'm very clear as I work with these young men in helping them to understand that who you are and how people actually perceive who you are not necessarily the same thing. And I come from a family of police officers. My father retired as a lieutenant, did 27 years on the NYPD. And one of the things that he said to me was, as he was a police officer at the 73rd Precinct in Brownsville, toughest section in Brooklyn at the time, he said, it was real easy to tell the good kids from the bad kids. The kids that were up to no good had a certain swagger, they dressed a certain way. The kids who were going to school had their own style, but it was different. Today, it is very difficult to tell the good kid from the bad kid. And so that's a perception thing that our kids have to be aware of, and they have to deal with that. And so I'm not trying to place any value issues on them in terms of how you just, or whether you wear a hoodie or I don't tell the kids don't wear a hoodie. I wear a hoodie. I just had a hoodie on 5 minutes ago before I came here, right? And so it's not that I'm trying to say, but it's more this notion of helping them to understand about how they, I don't want to overemphasize the sagging, but how you carry yourself, how you conduct yourself, your ability to be able to articulate who you are, what you do, and what you're about is something that I think is really, really important. And that's something that we really spend a lot of time, and we have lots of conversations with our young men about these kinds of things. And at the end of the day, they can carry and conduct themselves in the way that they think is best, but I don't want them to do it within a vacuum. I want them to know the issues that they face every day, and as long as they've got the information, they're informed, and we've been in good conversation and dialogue, how they order their steps from there, that's entirely up to them.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Thank you, Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz. Dr. Watson, how can can we create classroom environments that work better for our students, including teachers that look like their students and understand their cultures, different ways of instructions that work for them, and spaces that are created for their success?
Wow, that's a great question. It looks a lot like Eagle Academy. I think that if you read Gloria Ladson-Billings' work on culturally relevant pedagogy, we also need culturally relevant leadership and culturally relevant schools. I think that oftentimes in urban communities, schools are simply placed in neighborhoods indifferent to the respective community. I think in a school, the school has to be of the community. And so if you're aware of the people that you serve and the roles that parents actually place on teachers in schools. Schools are much more like communities, I think now than ever before. Pre-Brown versus Board of Education, when there was all black schools and such, schools functioned just like communities. You knew your mom knew, the teachers, and you saw them in the grocery store, you saw them in church, and you saw them in the neighborhood. So if you acted up, word got home really quickly. Even if you did act up, oftentimes it was dealt with in school and never really made it home. And I think that we have to kind of go back to that. Oftentimes schools are, again, placed in communities indifferent of the people themselves. And so to be aware, and not just culturally relevant, but culturally sound and culturally respectful of the people, I think that has to happen. A majority of our teaching force, as you know, are white women. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love white women. However, if white people are to be successful in educating our children, they have to love us as well. The premise in education, we act in local parentis, in place of the parents. And all parents, I don't care who or what the parent is, all parents love their children. And teachers, we spend a lot of time in the classroom with the kids, doing the work, before school, after school, during school. If you don't love them, it's going to show. And so if we operate from that foci, from that place of love, from that place of community, then I think that we can successfully educate not just black children, but we can educate all children. I think that's the challenge of teachers. How can we reach people? Well, it's easy. It sounds hokey, but love. You have to like them. You have to find a common ground where you can do the work, but also appreciate who they are and build that. Terri Watson talks about when the students use this framework, community cultural wellness, where you recognize the assets in the community and you build on that, be it linguistic capital or aspirational capital. But whatever's good, you have to build. And I think that's where we sometimes fall short. We come and look at particularly communities of colors from an urban, from a deficit perspective. We say what's wrong, what's missing, what's absent, as opposed to what's there, what can we build on, what can we make a connection with, so that the learning and the love can flow. Because if Cornel West is not it's a hot topic now, but one of his great lines, he said, you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. And I feel the same way about not just leadership, but also about teachers. You can't teach anyone if you don't like them. I think Malcolm X said, only a fool would let the enemy teach his children. We have to be aware of who we place in our classrooms in our community.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Dr. Sealey-Ruiz, how do you respond to people who say black and white children do need different curriculum? Do all children just need curriculum?
Do all children just need curriculum? Do black and white children need separate curriculum? The older I get and the more I'm seeing, this may seem strange and as a separatist, but I'm beginning to understand that the divide is getting bigger. And I'm beginning to think, yes, I'm beginning to think that, a lot is in my head. I'm thinking Gloria Latson's work, where she had white and black teachers who were so successful with particularly black boys. Again, they were connected to the community in a very particular way. With the direction that we're going in, with Common Core standards, standardized testing, cultural divides, I don't want to say that, separate education would be a panacea, but I'm also thinking about what we did well and what did work. And if we can somehow get teachers to understand what's needed and to deliver that, then I would say, okay, no, we don't need anything separate. But honestly, the way that we're going, there has to be a particular teacher, and I don't want to just say black teacher, that understands the society that we're in, the institutionalized racist structures that we're under, the white supremacist structures that are leaning on all of us, and to be able to be effective in the schools. If that cannot happen, and these could be black teachers that are not doing it right, right? It's a particular type of teacher that has a self-understanding and an understanding of society. So if you're Latino, if you're white, if you're Asian, and you know that, then yes, you can teach children successfully. But if you're in a cloud and you're not trying to come to grips with who you are and what this society has done and continues to do, then no one's going to be taught well. And we have to stop pretending and to think that one curriculum is going to do it or a particular school. We've got to get down to the human aspect of it. I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I'm thinking out loud.
It is all right.
So that's what I have for today.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sealey-Ruiz. Thank you, Dr. Sealey-Ruiz. So my final question for tonight. Do you believe that zero tolerance policies are needed to be put in place in an educational setting for negative behavior in an educational institution? How can we really and truly get our students to fall in love with learning with policies that are put in place such as this? And I'm going to start this question with Mr. Banks and we'll end with Dr. Watson.
So the Mets are winning 7-2. Let me say that, first of all, I understand some of the intent with the zero tolerance, but the reality is that there's no one size that fits all. When you're truly engaged in real education and the teaching and learning process, it's always nuanced. There's never just, this is what happens, and across the board, this is our response. On its face, it means that you really don't understand what education, working with young people, and what youth development is really all about. So, having been in the schools and understanding when I was the principal of Eagle Academy in my very first year, and I was maybe in my second week in the position, and it was the end of the day, the bell rings, and the kids are starting to head out of school, and all of a sudden I saw one young man fly by my office in the hallway. And then 2 seconds later, hit another one. Now you remember, I had been a principal already for years, so you have a certain radar as a principal, like, oh, okay, something's going down. It was different than the normal kind of running that you might ordinarily see. This was running with a purpose. And so I'm like, okay, something's about to go down. And as I started to get out from behind my desk, a third one runs. So now I'm really hustling to get out there because I'm figuring the fight is getting ready to happen or something. And I get outside, and lo and behold, on the ground, right past my office, like a pretzel, 3 young men in like a death grip on the ground. And I looked, and I yelled out, "What are you doing?" And they all looked up at me. They stopped. They stayed locked. And they're on the ground. And they all looked up at me and they said, "What? We just played." Right? And it was at that moment that I recognized, so of course my response is, stop the horsing around, get off the floor, right? Get your books, it's time to go home. Had that been another school and another situation, you could have had 3 boys now being brought into the principal's office, being disciplined, parents being called up, kids getting suspended. And it's just, to me, again, it goes back to that notion about being culturally responsive. So it's not simply in your curriculum, but it's in the adults who are leading and the adults who are managing a place who have to understand the young people that you're working with. First of all, boys, how many of you have, well, most of you are very young, but anybody here have any sons, brothers, nephews? Let me ask this. How many of you know that boys are different from girls? Like, we go there, right? There's a whole just different kind of energy. Yes. Boys have an energy that will bounce off the walls. Yes. One of the things when I wrote this book, most people are looking for some of the strategies that we engage with our young men in the schools, and I talk about that at length. But I actually opened the book talking about my brother Philip. My brother Philip is 11 months younger than me, and we were born in the same year. Y'all go figure that one out. Mad people in here. I was born in January. Philip, my brother, was born in December. Interesting. So we would hear all the jokes, you know, about your mother and father didn't have any TV or anything like that. My dad said, no, son, I just loved your mother very much. And my younger brother, Terry, came 2 years later. So my mom and dad had 3 boys, and they had me when they were 19. My mom and dad had 3 boys in Brooklyn by the time they were 22 years old. Right? I liked school. I did well in school. Philip, my parents actually, I think, made a mistake. They started him in the same year that I started. Right? He was always the youngest kid in his class. He was not ready. He should have waited and started the following year. And then he was always being compared to me because I did well. And so Phil would struggle every year to make it through. And so after a while, because he was not getting that kind of recognition that you mentioned earlier, he just decided, well, I'm not going to compete with my brother David. I'm just going to develop my own kind of clown, bad boy identity, which he did. And he did that almost from K through 12. Well, he really struggled every step of the way. We would just keep our fingers crossed that he would get promoted each year. You know, he said, yes, Phil, you're going to the 3rd grade. You made it, right? Phil, it wasn't until he got accepted to one college. And he was very fortunate because he had a strong mother and father who said, as we became adults, said, you know, the teachers recommended that we put your brother in special education. You know, said that he was just too hyper. They wanted us to put him on medication, right, to calm him down. There was nothing wrong with him. He was just a boy. But he was working very often with teachers who didn't understand what that meant to work with boys, and particularly boys who have a lot of energy. And Phil went on to go to Lincoln University, the oldest HBCU in the country. And that's when the light came on at Lincoln. And then he just did extremely well, graduated from Lincoln, followed my father into the New York City Police Department. They have the same name. My father's a junior, my brother's a 3rd. So it's a big story, because they were both in the NYPD, and my dad was a lieutenant. A couple of years later, Phil got promoted because he had my dad to follow as his role model and told him all the things that he needed to know. And Philip became a sergeant. A couple of years later, he got promoted and became a lieutenant. And father and son were both lieutenants on the NYPD at the same time. Big deal, right? His teachers would have never imagined that for Phil when he was in the 4th or 5th grade, when they were recommending that he be placed in special ed and be placed on medication, that he would have gone so far and be on NYPD and advanced. But it got better. A couple of years later, he got promoted again and became a captain, 1 rank above my father. And my father said, it's time to retire. That the day you have to salute your own son, it's time to go. Philip went on to become an inspector, then he made the rank of chief with 1 star in his uniform. In the New York City Police Department, there are only about 12 chiefs who make this rank of 1 star. Then he made the rank of 2 star, and there are only 8 2-star chiefs. Then he made the rank of 3-star. There are only 4 3-star chiefs. He ultimately, when Commissioner Kelly was here, made the rank of 4-star chief. There's only 1 4-star chief. It's the top uniform police officer in the entire city of New York. And that was my brother, the chief of the department. He's the chief of all of the chiefs, the top cop in New York other than the police commissioner. He ultimately, some of you may have heard several months ago, when Chief Banks stepped down from the NYPD, and it was involving kind of a little power thing with the police commissioner. My point is to say this. Teachers would have never imagined that for my brother. But it's about the level of expectation that we bring as adults. You don't know who these young people are that are in our classrooms. And to sit and say at the 3rd grade, and I've heard teachers say that when I was a teacher, this one is heading for prison, this one is going to want to do, in the 3rd and 4th grade, you're already now casting lifelong judgment, and when you have that in your mind as an adult, that's what you're going to bring to the table each and every day in terms of how you deal with them and the resources that you make available to them as well. And so those are the lessons that we have to understand. It's really so much more about what we're doing to prepare the people who are going to be in our schools and in our classrooms to meet the needs of all of our kids.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Dr. Stuart Wells.
I think that the zero tolerance policies, when you put them in their context, in terms of the era in which they were adopted and supported and still are being supported, and you connect it to kind of prison industrial complex, to mass incarceration, to school to prison pipeline, to the book by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, right? We have to put them in that larger context. And then I think we understand A, why they're passed and supported, and B, why we don't like them. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just say that any policy that dehumanizes your students is a policy you want to revisit. And what I'm grateful for is, and I'm beginning to get more into understanding it, there's a conference at Lehman College on May 8th, on restorative justice practices. So I'm grateful for that kind of counter way of seeing how to handle situations that come out. But zero tolerance, anything that's an all or nothing, we have to always question. There has to be room and space for questions to be asked, and not that this is the policy, and if you do this, you're going to be thrown out. That's what I mean by dehumanizing. You're taking away the noticing of that person to say, what possibly happened to you to make you act this way? And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be consequences when people, whatever, break the rules, but the all or nothing and what it does and where it leads, when we talk about school, we have to consciously say, we have to shake the tree and say, okay, this can't be fully right? So anything that dehumanizes students, I'm completely against, and I believe zero tolerance policies, the research that I see more often than not dehumanizes the child.
Dr. Watson.
Well, as you know, or maybe you don't know, but I'm here in the place of my good friend, Dr. Christopher Emden. Do you know him? And in this vein,
I think we heard of him.
You heard of him? Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. Good friend of mine. So I'm gonna quote Tupac. We ain't meant to survive. It's a setup. And I feel the very same way about zero tolerance policies. They are a lot like remember the Rockefeller laws?
Yeah.
And you know why they were deconstructed? Because they had disparate impact on communities of color. I think the very thing can be said for zero tolerance policies and their impact on students of color. I think that it's obvious. I think they're too black and white. And I think, looking at the suspensions and expulsions, we know what the problem is. The question now is, what do we put in place to stop these policies?
Thank you. Can you please give this panel a round of applause? All right, so we will now open up for a 15-minute question and answer.
Core conversation.
Yeah.
Core conversation.
The conversation.
The conference. You can get to the mic.
You have to go to the mic.
If you'd like to. Yeah, you can just think better.
Because I know they're filming and they need, those are my media people. Well, I just want to say thank you guys for that wonderful presentation. Although I do have to push back a little respectfully, on this baggy jeans thing, because there's a word you use, particularly exposure, and I was in my head I'm exposed to what? White middle class values, because we are exposed to that. But I feel like we still choose to dress the way we want to dress, regardless. In fact, I feel like that exposure, like being here, for example, has been more impressive to me than just, right now I kind of look a little bit like everybody else, but if I chose to wear my hoop earrings or wear more bangles, would you have treated me different? So I kind of want to open up that conversation because particularly going back to the statements about love and about shattering that deficit lens and replacing that with an asset lens. I love when I see, especially people here in the academy, with baggy parents, because then I can know who they are and that they're being their authentic selves. And I think that's beautiful when you wear your baggy pants in spite of that, because you are bringing that to you, and by being your authentic self, you are a disruption. And I wish Dr. Emily was here, because I would love to hear you guys talk about that. But I just wanted to kind of open that up and see what's going on in everyone else's minds in that, because that's how I felt. But I also wanted to open up another conversation around special education, because we talk about how our kids are placed in special education a lot of times, but I have a lot of friends who are parents, and they're afraid of that stigma that their child might receive, but they also decide to put their child in there anyway because of the extra resources that they're going to get and the extra monetary support they're going to get. So my question is, like, how do we navigate that and really understanding, is it the school or is it also the parents that want that for their kids despite the stigma because of the financial support that comes out of that? Because that's real too. Thank you.
I'll just say on the first part of the question about the pants, right? So there's baggy pants and there's sagging. And we can agree to disagree. Yeah. I mean, it's as simple as that. So when you said the word exposure, I don't know if you were referring, if I said the kids who are exposing their behinds. Oh, you were talking about.
Until they are exposed to the web, though.
I'm not.
It's cool.
Yeah. Okay, listen. I want our kids to have what they need to be successful. I want them to be able to get all that they can possibly get in terms of education and in life. And I'm going to give them everything that I possibly can. I'm going to surround them with as many adults as we possibly can to help them to be whole and to be strong. And then in the process, we have, because we have these conversations at the schools as well around style and all those kinds of things as well. So, yeah.
Thank you to all the panelists. Mr. Banks, one thing I appreciated that you brought up and kind of unpacked a little bit was this concept of the gaze that's directed towards our children, specifically towards Black men. I also wanted to push back on that point. I come from a slightly different perspective. I'm an early childhood educator. I taught preschool for 10 years, and 3 of those years were taught at an Upper East Side preschool that was predominantly white, upper middle class, that had, at its most diverse, 3 Black boys out of a population of 122. And I've watched all 3 of those boys be psychologically crippled by the gaze of their teachers and the parents of other children. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is when I think about Martin Luther King, who marched in his suits and was beaten in his suits and imprisoned in his suits and ultimately assassinated. So I'm looking at 3-year-old Black boys who are psychologically destroyed by this gaze, and I'm looking at grown men in suits who are physically destroyed from these same supremacist perspectives. That's the position that I want to push back on, this idea of style and the way that Black men carry themselves. And I want to stop short of saying respectability politics, because I appreciate and I respect and I want to honor everything that you've done in our community. I think it's needed and it's necessary. But I think a lot of the responsibility falls on us in our community as community members, as parents, so on and so forth, to teach our children a certain way of being so that they'll be protected from this gaze and from the violence that comes from this gaze. And so my question, sir, is do you feel that more privileged communities have a responsibility to change their ways of thinking about Black boys and black girls too? And if so, what does that look like? Because we're doing a lot already, and black men are still being killed in the street.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a complex question, and the response to it is one that I don't necessarily have the answers to as well. I don't mean even to suggest that young men who walk around with their pants hanging off are the ones that become a target, and me walking with a suit that I'm not a target somehow remove the gaze. Not at all. So I want to be very clear. What I'm talking about is I want us first of all, before even the assault, before the attack, I want us to be as strong as we possibly can be. I want us to be nourished and to get the kinds of things that we need as people each and every day. There are many of us who are walking around in suits and ties and doing what society would consider to be respectable things, who are totally lacking vision, lacking consciousness. And they are every bit as much of a problem as anybody else. And so there's just so much work that we have to do, I think, first of all, for ourselves, and then even holding our own selves accountable to getting better ourselves. And there was a scene of Don Cheadle when he played in the movie, the one where he said, "No one is coming to save us." Hotel Rwanda. But there was something about that statement when he said, "No one is coming to save us. We'll have to save ourselves." And this notion that we as a people have to begin to make sure that we are connected, we are strong, we are supporting each other, we are loving each other, is really, really, really important to me, first of all. But the larger assault, the larger attack that is taking place on us is one in which it's a very complex thing in terms of how we respond. So I think the activism that's taking place, Black Lives Matter, and calling attention to these issues is critically important. But there are so many other things that I think that we have to continue to do as well. And I don't have all of the answers in regards to this. You know, we talk about the Rockefeller drug laws. The Rockefeller drug laws are so responsible for the removal of so many of our men from the community. You saw the New York Times last week, said 1.5 million black men are quote unquote missing from the ages of 25 to 54, either incarcerated or gone, right? Meaning dead. These health issues and the health disparities which have caused a shorter lifespan for black men. There are just so many challenges that we are facing. And what I've often said to young people is, you know, get in where you fit in, but you got to be in the game. You can't be on the sidelines. So whether you're being involved with these young men each and every day like I am, that's one way to help. Whether you are like a room full of you really smart people, real academics, and you're going to really help to change the landscape from a policy standpoint and push in that regard. Those of you who are going to become professors and helping to prepare people. But each of us has to play some kind of a role. But the one thing that we can't afford to do is to be on the sidelines having rhetorical conversations while the battle is going on. Thank you.
Excuse me, I just want to push back a little bit on that New York Times article.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
article was written, right, one of my good friends, Dr. Ivory Tolson out of DC, he pushed back on that. Just wanted to say one sentence. Be wary of a report about black men written by 3 white men and just what their agenda is as researchers. You know, you can make a research, say whatever you want to, you know that. It's not objective, it's kind of subjective. So be wary of that stat that they pushed out there. There's a reason for that kind of dialogue, and it's not, you know, in our best interest.
But you know what, and I'm going to say this as well, right? Because again, I don't want to get it back and forth with the kind of talking thing, but I work with these kids, and I will tell you, if I brought you to the Eagle Academy right now and put 1,000 young men in the room and said, how many of you are your fathers involved in your lives? The overwhelming overwhelming majority of their hands will go up to tell you my father is not around. Don't know my father, not seen him. And I've been on panels, and I know Ivy very well. We're all part of this work. There are a lot of ways in which our fathers who are active and engaged are not counted, and I get that as well. But for me, the sad reality is that far too many of our young men, no matter where the number winds up being, do not have dads. And I don't want to get into sometimes we can get into a kind of thing. I'm telling you, I've been working with these young men, and I see the young men, the ones who find themselves in trouble, and I get passionate about it because I'm with them every day, and I'm trying to help them. And for so many of them who are coming up, they don't have a father around. And it's one thing when they're 5, 6, 7 years old, and they're little, and they're lovable, huggable, and cute. But as they start to get older, and this transition to manhood, and they don't have that marker that I had to help them understand how to navigate your way from being a boy into being a man, that's real. So whatever that number is, even if it's not 1.5, whatever it is, I'm telling you, it is so significant that it has not only had the impact on the boys, it's had the impact on the girls as well, who don't have that father figure to help them understand, well, what is a good man supposed to look like? Like how as I'm out here navigating my way in terms of dating and everything else, and so many of these girls can tell you, I don't even know what a good man. I've not been exposed to it, and so I got to figure it out on my own. And the boys are trying to figure it out on their own.
And you know that what you just shared makes me go back to your comment around roots. And I think what I find important when I work with young people is understanding the historical context and the historical lineage to that, about fathers being removed, right? When you look at, Joy Leary's work where she talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, but there is a historical context for this. There is, and I don't dare say formula, but the removal of fathers, and that having those conversations with young people so that they don't believe that there's something wrong with me, that this person didn't want me, but that there's systemically, and this is where I'm going back to systemic structures, the white supremacist structures that we're under, there is a formula, there's a connection and a history to what we're seeing now.
Absolutely.
And how we can please teach our kids to understand it,
Yes.
just to have some kind of historical framework so that they don't think just my daddy walked out and left me.
That's right.
So if we can just, teaching of that history is so important, because then that can help when people start beating themselves up and their self-esteem is suffering, to understand that there's a larger piece at play. Now that doesn't mean that we don't try, and we are still here and we're still pushing back at it, but there has to be some kind of historical context, or else you just continue to think that something's wrong with you.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Phenomenal question. We have time for one more question. I'm sorry for everyone who's in. We have only time for one more question.
Well, I've been waiting here, so I'm going to take it.
No pressure.
All right. So, I'd like to, if you would please bear with me briefly, I'd like to reopen the idea of, because I may have missed something, separate black and white curriculum. For lack of a better way of saying it, if I didn't engage in black studies, I'll call it, then my life would be significantly worse. I wouldn't understand our country. I wouldn't understand, I would dare say life. And so when I hear that, my response is, for lack of more precise terms, white people need, how about this, I as a white person need to understand and have, perhaps, however it may be defined, and people will define it differently, a black curriculum, to understand what it means to be in this country, and to understand my, or perhaps other white people's roles in how we got to where we are. And to take another thing here about hip hop is to say, with the consumer, last I checked, white suburban youth were purchasing hip hop and consumers of hip hop at really high rates, at least as is documented. And so I'm wondering where perhaps hip hop can work as some sort of unifying force within curricular circles, and not just the study of hip hop that is played on the radio or whatever. Not that it's all bad, but maybe a critical hip hop studies, critical media studies, combined with critical historical studies to create an American pedagogy.
I was actually pointing to Ian, who works very well, not to take away from the panelists, but Ian, who works closely with Dr. Emden on these issues. Ian wanted to say something in addition to the panelists.
Hey guys. So I have a lot to add. I think that to pull from that, I mean, hip hop changed my life, like first and foremost, because it was a place where I could learn how to express myself. And I think that like bringing separate, I don't know if we need separate curriculums, I don't know what that is, but media work and helping young people figure out the worlds that they live in and use that as the catalyst to change themselves and pursue academic goals. It is work that is imperative and work that I'm doing and that the whole hip hop education movement is doing here at TC and across the country. I mean, there's a ton of scholars everywhere doing it. I can give you some notes if you'd like. There's so much being done. It'll take a little time, but it's awesome work. And I agree that critical media work and that therapeutic work, using hip hop as a therapeutic process to understand what we're doing and our feelings and our thoughts and the world that we live in, especially in our socio-political climate and amongst the killings that we're seeing all the time, and that social justice framework. So much of what I've heard today is part of that work, and
And I think it speaks to the notion of when you say separate curriculum. Again, it's not as black and white as that, but it simply means that you've got to understand who are the young people that you are teaching. And so if you know the kids, you got to have a better idea about who your audience is, who you're working with. If I was in a classroom full of Chinese students, it would behoove me to deepen my understanding about who they are and their families. And that's how you teach. You're not teaching curriculum, you're teaching children. And so the curriculum is simply a tool by which you help to teach and to educate. And so it almost goes without saying that this notion that if you got different kids in your class, but you're teaching this one way all the time, no matter who's in the room. It's the same thing like the zero tolerance. It's the lazy way out, to just say, I do it this one way and everybody's got to meet the standard that I'm at. That's not an effective way of ultimately reaching all of your children. You got to love them, as it was said earlier, and you got to know who they are.
Could you please again give this panel a round of applause?